The pearl earring gleamed against the dark silk of his pillow, like a confession. Lydia Ashcroft didn't need an explanation. She didn't need tears or excuses or whatever performance her husband would attempt. The evidence sat cold in her palm, damning and final. She walked out of Ashcroft Manor that night without looking back. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the real betrayal had been watching them for months, waiting in the shadows of their own home, patient as poison. This is a story about the wars we don't see coming and the enemies who know us best. Tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you stay until the end, hit that like button. You won't regret it. The marriage had been arranged like most things in Lydia's life. Carefully, methodically, with all the warmth of a business contract. She'd walked into Ashcroft Manor 6 months ago with a clear understanding. This was alliance, not affection. Rowan Ashcroft needed a wife to solidify his position in society. She needed security and a name that meant something beyond her father's crumbling estate. It had worked, more or less. She didn't love him. Not in the way novels described, anyway. But she'd started to trust him, which felt more dangerous. That trust shattered on a Tuesday. Lydia had returned early from a charity luncheon, the kind of tedious affair where women smiled with their mouths and stabbed with their eyes. She'd claimed a headache, not entirely a lie, and come home to the vast echoing silence of the manor. The staff moved like ghosts through the halls, and Rowan was out handling business in town. She'd gone to their bedroom to rest. That's when she saw it. The pillow on Rowan's side of the bed sat slightly askew, as though someone had disturbed it and failed to properly replace it. Lydia wouldn't have noticed except for one detail, a shimmer of something pale catching the afternoon light. Her fingers moved before her mind could stop them, lifting the pillow. The earring sat there like an accusation. A single pearl drop, delicate and expensive, absolutely not hers. Lydia's breath caught. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she picked it up, the pearl cool against her skin. She knew every piece of jewelry she owned. This wasn't among them. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the thing. The logical part of her brain, the part that had been trained since childhood to observe, to calculate, to never react without proof, clicked into place. Evidence. Concrete. Undeniable. Someone had been in this bed. Someone who wasn't her. The betrayal didn't feel like fire. It felt like ice, spreading through her chest until she couldn't quite draw a full breath. She didn't cry. Lydia Ashcroft had learned long ago that tears accomplished nothing. Instead, she stood, smoothed her dress, and began to pack. Waltz. Mrs. Holloway found her 20 minutes later. The housekeeper appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, her expression professionally neutral. Mrs. Ashcroft, may I— Oh, her gaze landed on the open trunk, the neat stacks of folded dresses. I'll be leaving this evening, Lydia said without looking up. Please arrange for a carriage. Leaving? He shut his so. Mrs. Z. Holloway's voice carried the faintest edge of surprise. Has something happened? Nothing that concerns you. Sweet. Mr. Ashcroft is due back within the hour. I won't be here when he arrives. Mrs. Holloway stepped into the room. She was a handsome woman in her late 40s, efficient and sharp-eyed, the kind of housekeeper who ran a household with invisible threads of control. She'd been with the Ashcroft family for over a decade, long before Rowan's father passed and left him the estate. Mrs. Ashcroft, she said carefully, if there's been a misunderstanding— There's been no misunderstanding. Lydia finally turned to face her. I'd appreciate your discretion. Something flickered in Mrs. Holloway's expression. Not quite concern, not quite satisfaction. Something else Lydia couldn't name. Of course, the housekeeper said. I'll have the carriage ready. She left without another word. Lydia returned to her packing, moving with mechanical precision. Dresses, stockings, her personal correspondence, the few books she'd brought from her father's house. She left behind the jewelry Rowan had given her after the wedding, the sapphire necklace, the diamond bracelet. She took only what had been hers before. The earring sat on the nightstand where she'd placed it. Evidence. She picked it up one last time, studied it in the fading light. Then she slipped it into the pocket of her traveling coat. Proof. She'd need it when people asked questions. The carriage rattled through the countryside as dusk settled over the fields. Lydia sat rigid against the cushions, watching the landscape blur past. She'd instructed the driver to take her to the Ashcroft townhouse in the city, a smaller property Rowan kept for business trips. He wouldn't look for her there immediately. It would buy her time to think. Time to decide what came next. Divorce was nearly impossible, of course. Scandalous at best, ruinous at worst. But separation could be managed quietly if both parties agreed to discretion. She could retreat to the city, live on the allowance her marriage contract guaranteed, fade into the background of society, like so many other wives whose marriages had failed in private. It wasn't what she'd imagined 6 months ago, but then she'd imagined very little. The marriage had been her father's idea, pushed through in the final months before his death. Rowan Ashcroft is a good man, he told her, his voice weak from the illness that would take him 3 weeks later. Steady, honorable. You'll be safe with him. Safe. Lydia pressed her fingers to her temples. Safe from what? Poverty, perhaps? The crumbling walls of her father's estate, the creditors circling like vultures. Rowan had paid off her father's debts as part of the marriage settlement. She'd entered Ashcroft Manor with nothing but her name and a few trunks of belongings. And now she was leaving with even less. The city streets were lamplit by the time the carriage pulled up to the townhouse. It was a narrow, elegant building wedged between two others, the kind of property that whispered wealth without shouting it. A far cry from the sprawling estate she'd just fled. The housekeeper here, a different woman, older, less imposing, greeted her with mild surprise but didn't ask questions. Lydia was shown to a guest room on the second floor, a space decorated in pale greens and cream. "Will Mr. Ashcroft be joining you, ma'am?" the housekeeper asked. "No." "Very good. Shall I prepare supper?" "Just tea." The woman nodded and withdrew. Lydia stood alone in the unfamiliar room, still wearing her coat and gloves. Slowly, she pulled the earring from her pocket and set it on the writing desk by the window. It caught the lamplight, gleaming accusation. She stared at it until the tea arrived, and then long after. Rowan Ashcroft returned to the manor just after sunset, still dusty from the road. Business in town had run longer than expected. A dispute over property lines that required 3 different surveyors and a magistrate's patience. He was tired, hungry, and looking forward to a quiet evening. The house felt wrong the moment he stepped inside. He couldn't name it at first. Everything looked the same. The grand foyer with its marble floors, the staircase curving upward, the faint scent of beeswax and lavender. But something in the quality of the silence had shifted. Mrs. Holloway appeared from the direction of the kitchens, her hands folded at her waist. "Sir," she said, "welcome home." "Where's my wife?" The housekeeper's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Ashcroft departed this afternoon, sir. Rowan stopped halfway through removing his coat. "Departed where?" "She didn't say. She requested a carriage to the city. I assumed she would send word." He stared at her. "She said nothing else?" "Only that she would be leaving, sir. She seemed quite determined." Rowan's mind spun. Lydia had mentioned no plans that morning. No calls to make, no appointments. She'd been at a charity luncheon, he remembered because she'd complained about it over breakfast, her dry humor making him smile into his coffee. "Did something happen?" he asked. "I couldn't say, sir." There was something in the way she said it, something careful. Rowan had known Mrs. Holloway for years, long enough to recognize when she was choosing her words. "Pack a bag," he said. "I'm going to the city." "Tonight, sir?" "Yes." He took the stairs 2 at a time, heading for the bedroom. Maybe she'd left a note. Something. Anything that would explain why his wife had vanished without a word. The room looked undisturbed at first glance. The bed was made, the curtains drawn. Then he noticed the wardrobe standing open, empty spaces where her dresses had hung. She'd packed. Not hastily, Lydia was too precise for that, but thoroughly. Rowan moved through the room, searching. No note on the writing desk, no letter tucked into a drawer. He checked her vanity, her bedside table, even the small bookshelf where she kept her favorite novels. Nothing. He sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of it. They'd had no argument, no tension that morning. She'd been quiet, perhaps, but Lydia was often quiet, reserved. It was part of who she was, part of what he'd come to. He stopped that thought. This was a practical marriage. He'd been clear about that from the beginning, and she'd agreed. Affection wasn't part of the contract, but somewhere in the past 6 months, he'd started to forget that. Started to notice the way she smiled when she thought no one was watching. The way she listened when he talked about the estate, asking questions that proved she was actually paying attention. He'd started to want more than the arrangement allowed. And now she was gone. Rowan stood, jaw tight. Fine. If she wanted to run, he'd find her. But she was going to explain this face to face. Kate. He reached the townhouse just before midnight. The older housekeeper answered his knock, her face creased with sleep. Mr. Ashcroft, my wife, is she here? Yes, sir. But she's retired for the evening. Which room? The housekeeper hesitated, then gestured toward the stairs. Second floor, the green room. Rowan took the steps quickly, his boots loud in the silent house. He found the door and knocked once, firmly. Lydia. Silence. Lydia, I know you're awake. Open the door. More silence. Then finally, the sound of movement. The door opened a crack. She stood there in her dressing gown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Her face was composed, unreadable. You should go back to the manor, she said. She said, not without an explanation. There's nothing to explain. You left, without a word, without a note. That requires an explanation. Well, Lydia's hand tightened on the edge of the door. I'd prefer not to do this now. I don't care what you prefer. Tell me what happened. For a moment, he thought she'd slam the door in his face. But instead, she stepped back, opening it wider. Come in, then. Rowan entered the small room. It was neat, impersonal. Lydia's trunk sat in the corner, still half-packed. She moved to the writing desk and picked something up. When she turned back, she held out her hand. This is what happened. Rowan looked down at the pearl earring resting in her palm. He didn't understand. What is that? I found it under your pillow this afternoon. He stared at the earring, at her face, back to the earring. You think I... He couldn't finish the sentence. The accusation was too absurd. I don't think anything, Lydia said, her voice flat. I know what I found. Evidence doesn't lie. Lydia, I've never... He stopped, forced himself to breathe. I don't know whose that is, but it's not what you're imagining. Then whose is it? I don't know. It was in our bed, Rowan, under your pillow. He wanted to argue, to push back against the cold certainty in her voice. But the look in her eyes stopped him. She'd already decided, already built the case in her mind, weighed the evidence, delivered the verdict. Guilty. I have never, he said slowly, carefully, been unfaithful to you. Not once. Not ever. Then explain the earring. I can't, but that doesn't mean... Evidence, Lydia cut him off. That's all I have. That's all that matters. Rowan felt something crack in his chest. Not his heart. He wasn't romantic enough for that. But something close. The fragile thing they'd been building these past months. The understanding that had started to feel like the foundation for something real. She didn't trust him. Not enough. Fine, he said. His voice came out colder than he intended. If evidence is all that matters to you, then I'll find you better evidence. There's nothing to find. We'll see. What? He turned toward the door, then stopped, looked back at her standing there, rigid and alone in the lamplight. I thought we were building something, he said quietly. I thought you'd at least give me the benefit of doubt before running. Well, I'll suggest yes. Lydia's expression flickered. Just for a second, something that might have been regret crossed her face. But then it was gone, replaced by that cool, untouchable mask. Doubt requires trust. Wait, she said. I don't have that luxury. Rowan left without another word. He didn't return to the manor that night. Instead, he took a room at his club and sat awake until dawn, turning the problem over in his mind. Someone had placed that earring in his bed. That much was obvious. But who and why? The staff had access to the bedroom, of course. The maids who cleaned, Mrs. Holloway who supervised them. But they'd all been with him for years. He trusted them, didn't he? Rowan's mind caught on something. The way Mrs. Holloway had delivered the news of Lydia's departure. Careful. Almost rehearsed. I couldn't say, sir. But she could say. She'd been there when Lydia packed. She must have seen something, noticed something. Unless she already knew. The thought felt disloyal. Mrs. Holloway had run Ashcroft Manor since his father's time. She'd been the one constant in his life after his father died. keeping the household running while Rowan learned to manage the estate. She'd welcomed Lydia without complaint, had seemed nothing but professional. But had she really welcomed Lydia? Or had she simply tolerated her? Rowan rose from the chair, his decision made. He needed to go back to the manor, not to confront Mrs. Holloway, not yet, but to watch, to observe the way he should have been observing all along. If someone was playing games in his household, he was going to find out who, and then he was going to burn their world down. But Lydia didn't sleep that night either. She sat by the window of the green room, watching the city streets below. Carriages rattled past. Lamplight flickered. The world continued, indifferent to her small, private catastrophe. Rowan's words echoed in her mind. I thought we were building something. Had they been? She'd thought so. In the quiet moments between the formality of their arrangement, she'd started to see glimpses of the man beneath the title. The way he smiled when he talked about improving the estate, the way he listened to her opinions about the household, actually implemented her suggestions, the way he'd looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Like she mattered. But evidence didn't lie. And the earring had been there, solid and real, undeniable proof of what exactly? Lydia pulled the earring from her pocket again, studied it in the pre-dawn light. It was expensive, well made, the kind of thing a woman of society would wear. But who? She tried to picture the women she'd met in the past 6 months, the neighbors who'd called to welcome her, the wives at the charity luncheon, anyone who might have had access to the manor, to the bedroom. The list was long, too long. And yet something nagged at her, some detail she was missing. The earring had been under Rowan's pillow, not hers, specifically his, as though placed there to be found. But by whom? And why would someone want her to find it? Unless... Lydia sat up straighter, her mind suddenly racing. Unless the point wasn't the infidelity. The point was the accusation, the fracture it would create. Someone wanted her to leave. The realization sent ice through her veins. She'd been so focused on what the evidence meant that she hadn't stopped to question the evidence itself. Who had access? Who had motive? Who stood to gain from her departure? Mrs. Holloway's face flashed through her mind. The housekeeper's careful neutrality when Lydia announced she was leaving. No surprise, no protest. Just smooth, efficient acceptance. I'll have the carriage ready. Lydia stood pacing the small room. She'd been played, manipulated, and she'd walked right into it, so convinced of her own logic that she hadn't seen the trap. But who was pulling the strings? And more importantly, what did they want? She needed to go back. Not to Rowan, not yet. She wasn't ready to face the look in his eyes, the hurt she'd put there with her accusation. But she needed answers, and answers were at Ashcroft Manor. Rowan returned to the estate just after breakfast. The house felt different in the morning light, less imposing. But the wrongness remained, that subtle shift in the air. He found Mrs. Holloway in the kitchens, reviewing menus with the cook. Mrs. Holloway. A word. She followed him to his study without question. Rowan closed the door and gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. I need you to tell me exactly what happened yesterday, he said. When did you first see my wife? Mid-afternoon, sir. I went to the bedroom to check on the arrangement of the linens and found Mrs. Ashcroft packing. And she said nothing about why she was leaving? Only that she wished to depart before your return. Did she seem upset? Angry? Mrs. Holloway considered this. Determined, sir. Quite calm, actually. As though she'd made a decision and saw no reason to discuss it. That sounded like Lydia, methodical even in crisis. And you didn't think to send word to me? I assumed it was a personal matter, sir. Not my place to interfere. Rowan studied the housekeeper's face. She met his gaze evenly, her expression professional. Nothing in her demeanor suggested deception, but nothing suggested complete honesty either. Mrs. Holloway, he said carefully, has anyone been in the master bedroom who shouldn't have been? Sir? Visitors, staff members going where they oughtn't, anyone at all. The maids clean daily, of course, but beyond that, no sir. I supervise the household quite strictly. I'm aware. He let the silence stretch. Mrs. Holloway didn't fidget, didn't break eye contact. Years of service had taught her patience. That will be all, Rowan said finally. She nodded and left. Rowan sat at his desk, tapping his fingers against the wood. He believed her, and yet he didn't. Something was wrong, but he couldn't grasp it. He needed a different approach. Over the next week, Rowan became a student of his own household. He paid attention in ways he never had before, watched the servants' interactions, noted who spoke to whom, who avoided whom. He reviewed the household accounts, looking for irregularities. He questioned the head gardener about visitors. He even spoke with the stable master about which carriages had been used and when. Nothing obvious emerged, but small things started to accumulate. The way the younger maids deferred to Mrs. Holloway beyond normal respect, something closer to fear. The way his correspondence sometimes arrived to his desk already opened, the seal carefully replaced. The way Lydia's instructions to the staff had been quietly countermanded, her authority undermined in ways so subtle he'd never noticed. Your wife suggested we change the menu for Thursday's dinner, sir, but I thought you'd prefer the original plan. Mrs. Ashcroft mentioned redecorating the morning room, but that's been your mother's room for so long. I know Mrs. Ashcroft requested new linen, sir, but the cost seemed excessive. Lydia had never complained, never mentioned that her role as mistress of the house was being blocked at every turn. She'd simply grown quieter, retreated more, and he'd been too focused on the estate to notice. Rowan felt something dark and cold settle in his chest. Not just anger, something worse. Guilt. He'd brought Lydia into this house, given her a title and a role, and then failed to protect either. He'd assumed the household would accept her because he'd married her. He'd assumed his staff's loyalty extended to his wife. He'd assumed wrong. But the earring, that was different. That was deliberate sabotage, meant to destroy his marriage. And there was only one person with the access, the knowledge, and the motive. Mrs. Holloway had run this house for over a decade. She'd served his father. She'd been there through his mother's illness and death. She'd helped Rowan navigate the first terrible year after inheriting the estate. She'd been indispensable. And now she saw Lydia as a threat. The question was, what to do about it? Lydia spent the week gathering her own evidence. She couldn't return to the manor yet, not without a plan. But she had other resources. The women who'd called on her in those first months. The neighbors who'd extended invitations. She paid visits, asked careful questions disguised as social gossip. I've been thinking of replacing some of our staff. Do you know anyone reliable? I find it so difficult when they've been with the family for ages. Mrs. Holloway has been such a help, but I worry I'm too dependent on her judgment. Do you manage your own household, or? The responses were illuminating. Most of the women praised Mrs. Holloway's efficiency. But a few, the older ones, the ones who'd known the Ashcroft family for years, said things that made Lydia's instincts sharpen. Oh, she runs that house like a general. Always has. I remember when Rowan's father was alive. Mrs. Holloway practically raised that boy after his mother passed. Very devoted. Some housekeepers never quite accept a new mistress, dear, especially when they have been queen of the castle for so long. Devoted, queen of the castle. Lydia began to see the shape of it. Not a love affair. Something else. Something quieter and more corrosive. Possession. Mrs. Holloway had run Ashcroft Manor for years. Had served Rowan's father, then Rowan himself. Had been the constant female presence in Rowan's life after his mother died. She'd shaped the household in her image, controlled every detail, wielded authority that went far beyond a servant's role. And then Lydia had arrived. Young, new, bearing the title that made her, officially, mistress of the house. Of course, Mrs. Holloway would see her as a threat. The question remained. How far would she go to eliminate that threat? The earring suggested the answer, as far as necessary. Lydia sat in the townhouse drawing room, her tea growing cold as she thought through the implications. She needed proof, real proof, the kind that would survive scrutiny. Because if she was going to accuse the housekeeper of sabotage, she'd need evidence that would stand against Mrs. Holloway's years of service and apparent loyalty. She'd need Rowan to believe her, and right now she wasn't sure he would. The memory of his face when she'd shown him the earring still haunted her, the shock, the hurt, the way his voice had gone cold when she'd chosen evidence over trust. I thought we were building something. They had been. And she'd destroyed it with one accusation. Lydia set down her teacup with a sharp click. No, she wouldn't accept that. She'd made a mistake, acted on incomplete information, let her fear of betrayal override her judgment. But that didn't mean the marriage was beyond saving. It just meant she needed to fight for it, and fight smarter. Betrayal. 10 days after she'd left, Lydia Ashcroft returned to the manor. She didn't send word ahead, didn't give anyone time to prepare. She simply arrived in the late afternoon, stepping out of the hired carriage with her trunk and her resolve. The footman who answered the door looked startled. "Mrs. Ashcroft, is my husband home?" "Yes, ma'am, in his study." "Don't announce me." She walked through the house she'd fled, her footsteps echoing on marble. The halls looked the same, felt the same. But she saw them differently now, not as her home, but as a battlefield she'd temporarily abandoned. She found Rowan at his desk, papers spread before him. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He looked tired, older than she remembered, though it had only been 10 days. Lines around his eyes she hadn't noticed before. "Lydia, we need to talk," she said. "Really talk. Not accusations, not defenses. The truth." Rowan leaned back in his chair, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "I'm listening." Lydia closed the door behind her. This conversation was going to change everything, one way or another. Rowan stood slowly, like a man trying to keep his temper leashed. "The truth? That's what you want now?" "Yes. 10 days ago, you didn't want the truth. You wanted evidence." Lydia forced herself to hold his gaze. "I was wrong." The admission cost her more than she'd expected. She'd spent her entire life being right, calculating, observing, never acting without certainty. Admitting she'd failed felt like stripping off armor in the middle of a battle. Rowan's expression shifted, not softening exactly, but something in the hard line of his jaw eased. "Say that again." "I was wrong," Lydia repeated. "I found the earring and I panicked. I built a case in my head before I had all the facts. That's not how I usually—" She stopped, shook her head. "It doesn't matter. I made a mistake. You thought I'd betray you. I thought evidence never lies, but I was asking the wrong questions." She pulled off her gloves, one finger at a time, needing something to do with her hands. "I should have asked who put it there, and why." Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he moved around the desk, closer. Not touching her, but near enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the tension he'd been carrying. "I've been asking those same questions," he said, "for 10 days. Did you find answers?" "Some." He gestured toward the chairs by the fireplace. "Sit. This is going to take a while." They settled across from each other, the space between them feeling both familiar and foreign. Lydia folded her hands in her lap, waiting. Rowan spoke carefully, choosing his words. "When you left, I thought it was about trust, about whether you believed me. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized this isn't about us at all. It's about control. Control? Of this house. Of me. Of everything that happens under this roof." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Tell me something. In the months you've been here, how many of your decisions actually got implemented?" Lydia blinked. "What do you mean?" "The staff? The household? When you gave instructions, did they follow them?" She started to say yes, then stopped. Thought about the menu changes that never happened, the redecorating plans that got quietly shelved, the new linens she'd requested that were deemed too expensive. "Some of them," she said slowly, "not all." "Who countermanded you?" "Mrs. Holloway mostly, but she always had a reason. Budget concerns or tradition or she didn't want you making changes." Rowan's voice was flat. "She's been running this house since my father's time. Nearly 12 years. She knows every corner, every servant, every routine. And then you arrived." Lydia felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You think she placed the earring? I think she wanted you gone." Rowan stood, paced to the window. "I started paying attention, really watching, the way the staff defers to her, the way my correspondence gets read before it reaches me, the way every suggestion you made got undermined so smoothly I never even noticed. That doesn't prove— The earring was placed under my pillow sometime between the morning you left for the charity luncheon and when you returned," Rowan cut in. "The maids clean in the morning. Mrs. Holloway does a final inspection after lunch. She's the only one who would have had access during that window." Lydia's mind raced. But why? What does she gain? Rowan turned from this window. Her position, her authority, everything she's built here over the past decade. His voice went quiet. I think she saw you as a threat to all of it. Oh, so she tried to destroy our marriage. She tried to make you leave, and it worked. Boom. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Lydia looked down at her hands, still folded in her lap. 10 days of doubt and anger and hurt, all of it engineered by a woman who'd smiled politely and called her Mrs. Ashcroft while slowly poisoning everything. We need proof, Lydia said finally. Real proof. Not theories. I know. And even if we find it, confronting her will be complicated. She's been with your family for years. The staff is loyal to her, not to me. I'm aware, she. Lydia met his eyes. This could get ugly. It already is ugly. Rowan came back to his chair, sat forward. But I won't have someone manipulating my household, and I won't have my wife driven out of her own home. Something in Lydia's chest tightened. My wife. He'd said it like he meant it, like the title wasn't just legal convenience, but actual claim. So what do we do? She asked. Rowan's expression hardened into something that reminded her why people in society called him formidable. We set a trap. But the plan was simple in concept, brutal in execution. They would give Mrs. Holloway exactly what she wanted, the appearance of a marriage falling apart. Lydia would stay at the manor but maintain cold distance from Rowan. Separate bedrooms. Minimal interaction. Every servant would see the cracks, hear the silence, witness the slow death of the Ashcroft marriage. And Mrs. Holloway would think she'd won. She'll get comfortable, Rowan explained, confident. People make mistakes when they think they've already succeeded. Lydia understood the logic, but the thought of walking through the manor, pretending her marriage was disintegrating, felt like volunteering for slow torture. How long? She asked. A week? Maybe 2. However long it takes for her to slip up. And if she doesn't? Rowan's jaw tightened. She will, because I'm going to push her. That night, Lydia moved her things to a guest room on the opposite side of the manor. The maids who helped her unpack tried to hide their curiosity, but Lydia saw the questions in their eyes. The younger one, Sarah, barely 18, looked genuinely distressed. Is everything all right, ma'am? She asked quietly as she hung up Lydia's dresses. Lydia kept her voice neutral. Just need some space, that's all. Of course, ma'am. But the girl's hands shook slightly as she worked, and Lydia knew the gossip would be all over the servants' quarters by midnight. Good. Let Mrs. Holloway hear it. Deck. The first few days were harder than Lydia had anticipated. She saw Rowan at breakfast, at dinner, in passing in the halls. They were polite, distant, the kind of married strangers that populated half the households in society. Every word felt wooden in her mouth, every silence stretched too long. At dinner the second night, Rowan asked about her day. Fine, Lydia said. Quiet. Good. The butler serving them glanced between them, then away. Lydia forced herself to cut her meat, chew, swallow. The food tasted like paste. Mrs. Holloway appeared in the dining room doorway. Will there be anything else, sir? No, thank you. Very good. I'll have the staff retire early then, unless Mrs. Ashcroft requires anything. Lydia didn't look up from her plate. Nothing. She felt Mrs. Holloway's gaze linger on her, assessing. Then the housekeeper withdrew. After dinner, Lydia retreated to her temporary room. It was well-appointed but impersonal, decorated in pale blues that reminded her of ice. She sat by the window, watching the grounds fade into darkness, and tried not to think about Rowan alone in the master bedroom. This was strategy. Necessary deception. It still felt awful. A soft knock at the door startled her. Yes? The door opened a crack. Rowan stood in the hallway, still in his dinner clothes. May I come in? Lydia nodded, and he slipped inside, closing the door behind him. We need to be careful, he said quietly. The walls in this house have ears. I know. They stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. This close, Lydia could see the strain in Rowan's face, the way his shoulders carried tension he couldn't shake. This is working, he said. Mrs. Holloway asked me this morning if you'd be staying long. What did you tell her? That I didn't know, that we were... Working through some difficulties. His mouth twisted. She looked almost sympathetic. Lydia felt anger flare in her chest. Sympathetic. She's good at this. I'll give her that. Rowan moved to the window, keeping his voice low. But she's also getting bolder. She's been asking questions about the household finances. Whether you'll keep your allowance if you leave permanently. Already planning for my absence. Exactly. He turns to face her. We need to escalate. Make her think the situation is more fragile than it is. How? Tomorrow night we argue, publicly, in front of the staff. Lydia's stomach clenched. About what? Doesn't matter. Something believable. Money, maybe? Or my time away from the manor. He paused. Can you do it? Make it convincing? She thought about the acting required, the careful balance between real emotion and controlled performance. Yes. Good. Rowan moved toward the door, then hesitated. Lydia. Yes? When this is over... He stopped, shook his head. Never mind, get some rest. He left before she could ask what he'd been about to say. Lydia stood alone in the cold blue room, her heart beating too fast. When this is over. The words felt heavy with implication, with possibility, but they'd have to survive the trap first. Watch. The argument happened over dinner the following evening. Rowan had timed it perfectly. The full household staff was present, footmen serving, maids clearing, Mrs. Holloway supervising from her position near the sideboard. Lydia had spent the afternoon rehearsing her lines, preparing herself. It still felt like stepping off a cliff. Rowan started it. I'll be traveling to London next week. Lydia set down her fork with deliberate precision. Again? Business, it can't be avoided. Of course it can't. She kept her tone just sharp enough to cut. Nothing here ever requires your attention. The footman removing her soup bowl froze for half a second. Rowan's expression didn't change, but Lydia saw his hand tighten on his wine glass. I have responsibilities beyond this house. And I have none, apparently, since every decision I make gets overruled. That's not fair, isn't it? Lydia looked directly at him, channeling every bit of frustration she'd actually felt over the past months. I suggest menu changes. Ignored. I request new furnishings. Too expensive. I try to hire additional staff. Unnecessary. Tell me, Rowan, what exactly is my role here? Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat softly. Perhaps this conversation would be better held in private. No. Lydia didn't look at the housekeeper. I think it's been held in private quite enough. Rowan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Lydia, don't. She stood as well, her napkin dropping to the table. I'm tired of being decorative. If you want a wife in name only, you should have been clear about that from the beginning. She walked out, leaving her dinner half-eaten and the entire staff staring. In the hallway, her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her skirts, forced herself to keep walking. Up the stairs, down the corridor, into the blue room. Only when the door closed behind her did she let herself breathe. That had been too easy. The anger had been too close to the surface. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady herself. Footsteps in the hall made her tense, but they passed by. Rowan, probably going to his study, maintaining the fiction. An hour later, a soft knock came. Lydia opened the door, expecting Rowan. Sarah stood there instead, her young face troubled. Ma'am, I'm sorry to disturb you. What is it? Mrs. Holloway sent me to check if you needed anything, but I wanted to... The girl lowered her voice. I wanted to ask if you're all right. Lydia felt something in her chest soften. That's kind of you. Sarah, I'm fine. It's just I heard the argument and... Sarah bit her lip. My mother always said that fights between husband and wife are natural, that they pass. If that helps. It does. Thank you. The girl nodded, still looking uncertain. Mrs. Holloway said you might be leaving again soon. I hope that's not true, ma'am. Things have been nicer with you here. Lydia studied the young maid's face. Nicer how? Sarah glanced down the hallway, checking. Just nicer. The staff, She stopped herself. I should go. Ring if you need anything. She disappeared before Lydia could press further. Lydia closed the door slowly, turning Sarah's words over in her mind. Things have been nicer. What did that mean? Had Mrs. Holloway's control extended to mistreating the servants as well? She needed to know more. But interrogating the staff would tip their hand, unless she could find one who was already inclined to talk. The next morning, Lydia made a point of walking through the kitchens. She'd avoided the space since arriving at the manor. It had seemed like overstepping, invading Mrs. Holloway's territory. But now she moved through it deliberately, nodding to the cook, observing the scullery maids at work. Mrs. Holloway appeared almost immediately. Mrs. Ashcroft, is something needed? I'm familiarizing myself with the household, Lydia said calmly. I've been neglecting my duties. Because something flickered in the housekeeper's eyes. Of course, ma'am, though I assure you everything is well in hand. I'm sure it is. Nevertheless, she continued her inspection, aware of Mrs. Holloway following 2 steps behind. The tension was palpable. The cook kept her eyes on her work. The maids moved with nervous efficiency. Lydia paused at the servants' entrance, looking out at the grounds. Tell me, Mrs. Holloway, how long have most of the staff been with the household? Bon? Moti. It varies, ma'am. Some for many years, others are newer. And they're all content in their positions? I believe so. No complaints? No requests for changes, Mrs. Holloway's voice went a shade cooler. If there are concerns, they come to me first. I handle such matters internally. I see. Lydia turned to face her. And what happens to staff members who don't come to you, who might have concerns about, let's say the management of the household? The housekeeper's expression remained perfectly composed. I'm not sure I understand your meaning, ma'am. Don't you? They stood in the doorway. 2 women locked in a battle neither could acknowledge openly. Mrs. Holloway wore her professionalism like armor. Lydia wore her title. Perhaps, Mrs. Holloway said softly, if you had specific concerns, you should discuss them with Mr. Ashcroft. Perhaps I should. After all, he understands how this household functions, how it's always functioned. The housekeeper's smile was thin. Change can be disruptive, especially when it comes from those who haven't yet learned how things work here. The threat was delivered so smoothly, wrapped in such politeness, that Lydia almost admired it. I appreciate your perspective, Lydia said. I'm sure we'll have many more conversations about how things work here. She left the kitchens, heart pounding. Mrs. Holloway had as good as admitted she saw Lydia as an outsider, someone who didn't belong, someone who should leave. Back in the blue room, Lydia found Rowan waiting. I saw you in the kitchens, he said. What happened? Lydia told him about the conversation, repeating Mrs. Holloway's words as precisely as she could remember. Rowan's expression grew darker with each sentence. She's not even pretending anymore, he said. No, she thinks she's already won. Lydia paced the room. But we still don't have proof, nothing that connects her directly to the earring. Then we push harder. How much harder? Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll tell her I'm considering dissolving the marriage. Lydia's breath caught. What? Not actually doing it, just considering it, asking her opinion on how to handle it quietly. He met her eyes. If she thinks she's about to win completely, she might get overconfident, make a mistake, or she might help you do it. I won't let that happen. You can't control what she does, Rowan. If she has connections, resources we don't know about, then we'll find out. His voice was hard. I'm not letting her keep this house hostage, and I'm not letting her think she can manipulate me. Lydia wanted to argue, to point out the dozen ways this could go wrong, but she saw the determination in his face and knew he'd already decided. When? She asked. Tomorrow morning. I'll ask her to my study. Tell her I need advice on a delicate matter. She'll be suspicious. Or maybe. But she'll also be curious. Rowan moved toward the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. He left, and Lydia was alone again with her thoughts and the cold blue walls. She couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she gave up trying and went down to the library. It was the one room in the manor where she'd felt truly comfortable. Walls of books, leather chairs, a fireplace that actually worked. She lit a lamp and settled into one of the chairs with the novel she'd been meaning to read. The words swam on the page. She couldn't focus. Footsteps in the hallway made her tense. Then Rowan appeared in the doorway, also clearly unable to sleep. "I thought I saw a light," he said. "Couldn't rest." Neither could I. He came in, closed the door quietly. "Mind if I join you? It's your library. It's yours too." He settled into the chair across from her, and for a while they just sat in the lamplight, not talking. It was the most comfortable silence they'd shared in days. "I keep thinking about what happens after," Lydia said finally. "After what? Us. After we catch her. After she's gone." She set down her book. "The damage is already done, Rowan. The staff will remember. The neighbors will hear rumors. Our marriage will always have this stain on it. Only if we let it. How do we not let it? How do we rebuild trust when it was destroyed so easily?" Rowan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. It wasn't easy. She worked at it for months, planned it carefully, and she still only succeeded because we weren't paying attention. I wasn't paying attention to her. I was too busy not trusting you. And I wasn't paying attention to you. I assumed you were fine because you didn't complain. He rubbed his face tiredly. "We both failed, but that doesn't mean we can't do better." Lydia looked at him in the lamplight, really looked, maybe for the first time since she'd come back. He was exhausted, frustrated, carrying the weight of a household that had turned toxic under his watch. But he was still here, still fighting. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "You could let me go. Find a wife who doesn't question every decision, who trusts evidence over people." "Is that what you think I want?" I don't know what you want." Rowan was silent for a long moment. Then, "I want a partner. Someone who challenges me when I'm wrong and supports me when I'm right. Someone who cares about this place enough to fight for it." He met her eyes. "I want you, Lydia. Not some perfect, uncomplaining version. You." The words landed in the quiet room like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything. Lydia's throat felt tight. "Even after I accused you? Even then. You were working with incomplete information. You made a logical choice based on what you knew." He almost smiled. "I can't fault you for that. It's what makes you good at this." "Good at what?" "Seeing patterns, asking hard questions, not accepting surface explanations." He leaned back. "Those are exactly the qualities I need in a wife. Mrs. Holloway counted on you being decorative and silent. She miscalculated." Lydia felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "So did I. I thought you wanted someone who wouldn't cause trouble. Where would be the fun in that?" She laughed, surprised. It was the first genuine laugh she'd managed in weeks. Rowan smiled, a real smile this time, not the careful mask he'd been wearing. "There, that's better." They stayed in the library until the lamp burned low, talking quietly about everything except the trap they were setting. For an hour, they were just two people learning each other in the dark. When Lydia finally went back to the blue room, she felt steadier. Whatever happened tomorrow, they'd face it together. That had to count for something. Morning came too fast. Lydia dressed carefully, choosing a dark green dress that made her look serious and capable. She pinned her hair severely, no softness. If this went badly, she wanted to look like someone who could withstand the consequences. At breakfast, Rowan was already in his study. The house felt tense, like a storm waiting to break. At precisely 9 o'clock, Mrs. Holloway knocked on the study door. Lydia waited in the morning room, positioned where she could see the hallway but wouldn't be immediately visible. She'd argued against eavesdropping, but Rowan had insisted. "If something goes wrong, I need you to witness it." She heard the study door close. Voices, too muffled to make out words. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then the door opened. Mrs. Holloway emerged, her face unreadable. She walked down the hallway with her usual measured pace, disappearing toward the kitchens. Lydia waited another minute, then went to the study. Rowan sat at his desk, staring at nothing. "What happened?" Lydia asked. He looked up, and the expression on his face made her stomach drop. She didn't even hesitate. he said quietly. I told her the marriage was failing, that I was considering options for a quiet separation, asked her advice on managing the household transition. And she had a plan ready, detailed, like she'd been preparing it for months. His voice was hollow. How to handle the staff, which rooms you'd vacate first, even suggestions for how to phrase the announcement to society. Lydia felt cold. She's been planning this from the beginning. Longer, since before you even arrived. Rowan stood, paced to the window. She asked me if I was certain, if I'd given the marriage a fair chance, all the right questions, but underneath it, I could hear the satisfaction. Did she admit to the earring? No, too smart for that. But she mentioned casually that she'd noticed signs of discord for weeks. Little things, as though she'd been documenting it. Lydia's hands clenched. What do we do now? Rowan turned from the window and something in his face had changed. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by cold fury. Now we stop playing games, he said. Tonight, we're going to force her hand. What do you mean, force her hand? Lydia asked. Rowan moved to his desk, pulled out a sheet of paper and began writing. I'm going to tell her I've made my decision. That you're leaving permanently at the end of the week. That I need her to prepare the household for the transition. She'll think she's won. Exactly. And when people think they've won, they get careless. He didn't look up from the paper. But here's what she doesn't know. I'm going to ask her to do something that will expose her. What? I'm going to tell her to pack your belongings, personally, not the maids, her. I'll say it's too delicate a matter to trust to the younger staff, that I need her discretion. He finished writing and looked up. And you're going to be there when she does it. Die os ishi sputs. Lydia felt her pulse quicken. You want me to confront her? I want you to watch her. See what she does when she thinks no one's looking. If she planted that earring, maybe there are others. Maybe she kept evidence of her manipulation. Rowan's voice was hard. People like Mrs. Holloway don't build campaigns like this without keeping trophies. That's a lot of assumptions. You have a better idea? Lydia didn't. The thought of facing Mrs. Holloway in the bedroom, the scene of the original crime, made her skin crawl. But Rowan was right. They needed something concrete, something undeniable. When? She asked. Tonight, after dinner. I'll tell her then. The rest of the day stretched out like a sentence waiting to be served. Lydia tried to read, to occupy herself, but the words meant nothing. She kept thinking about the bedroom, about Mrs. Holloway's hands touching her things, sorting through her life with that professional detachment. At dinner, Rowan was quieter than usual. They ate in near silence, the staff moving around them like shadows. Mrs. Holloway supervised from her usual position, her expression neutral. When the meal ended, Rowan set down his napkin. Mrs. Holloway, a word in my study. Of course, sir. Lydia watched them leave, her stomach tight. She waited in the drawing room, counting minutes. 10, 15, 20. Finally, footsteps in the hallway. Mrs. Holloway emerged from the study, walking toward the servants' quarters. Her face was calm, almost serene. She looked like a woman who'd just received exactly what she wanted. Rowan appeared in the drawing room doorway. It's done. What did you tell her? That you're leaving Friday, that she's to pack your belongings tomorrow night after the staff has retired. I told her I didn't want gossip spreading before we'd made a formal announcement. He moved closer, lowering his voice. She offered to do it immediately. I said no. I needed time to make arrangements. But I could see it in her eyes, Lydia. She's been waiting for this. Where will I be while she's packing? Hidden. The dressing room connects to a storage closet. There's a gap in the wall panel. You'll be able to see and hear everything. Lydia's hands felt cold. Lydia's kin. And if she doesn't do anything incriminating, then we find another way. But I don't think that's going to happen. Rowan's jaw was set. She's too confident now, too certain she's orchestrated this perfectly. Bokam. That night, Lydia barely slept. She kept imagining different scenarios. Mrs. Holloway finding her hiding, the confrontation turning violent, the whole plan collapsing into chaos. By morning, she felt hollow and jittery. The day crawled by. Lydia stayed in the blue room, claiming illness to avoid the staff. Rowan brought her tea at midday, stayed just long enough to make sure she was managing. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "Dozens, but I'm not backing out." "You don't have to do this. I can handle it alone." "No." Lydia set down her teacup. "This started because I didn't trust you. I need to see this through." Evening fell. Dinner passed in a blur of tasteless food and careful silence. Lydia excused herself early, went upstairs. The master bedroom felt like foreign territory now. She hadn't set foot in it since the day she'd found the earring. The dressing room was spacious, lined with wardrobes and drawers. At the far end, barely visible unless you knew to look, was the panel Rowan had mentioned. Lydia pressed it carefully. It swung inward, revealing a narrow storage space filled with old trunks and hat boxes. She squeezed inside, positioned herself where she could see through the gap. The view was limited but functional. She could see most of the bedroom and all of the dressing room. Now she just had to wait. The house settled into night sounds. Footsteps in distant hallways. Doors closing. The staff retiring to their quarters. Lydia's legs cramped in the confined space, but she didn't dare move. Then, finally, the click of the bedroom door opening. Mrs. Holloway entered, carrying a lamp. She set it on the dresser and stood for a moment, looking around the room. Her expression was unreadable. She moved to the wardrobe, began removing Lydia's dresses. Her movements were efficient, professional. Nothing in her demeanor suggested anything beyond a housekeeper performing an assigned task. Lydia's heart sank. Maybe they'd been wrong. Maybe Mrs. Holloway was just doing her job. Then the housekeeper paused. She glanced toward the door, as if checking that she was alone. Satisfied, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag. Lydia's breath caught. Mrs. Holloway opened the bag and removed something. Even from her hiding spot, Lydia could see what it was. Another pearl earring. The housekeeper studied it for a moment, turning it in the lamplight. Then she crossed to the nightstand on Rowan's side of the bed and opened the drawer. She placed the earring inside, carefully positioning it toward the back where it might be found during packing. Insurance. Another piece of evidence to salt the wound. Lydia's hands clenched. She wanted to burst out, to confront the woman right there, but she forced herself to stay still. Wait. See what else happened. Mrs. Holloway returned to packing, but now she moved with less care. She folded dresses roughly, shoved delicate items into the trunk without wrapping them properly. The mask of professionalism had slipped, replaced by something uglier, contempt. Finally, the housekeeper murmured to herself. Finally. She paused at Lydia's writing desk, opened the drawers one by one, found the small stack of letters Lydia had written to her late father but never sent. Private thoughts, grief she'd never shared. Mrs. Holloway read one, her lip curling. Then she set them aside, not packing them, leaving them to be found, read, exposed. Lydia felt rage building in her chest, white-hot and barely controlled. The housekeeper moved to the jewelry box, opened it. Most of the expensive pieces were gone. Lydia had left them behind when she fled. But a few remained. A brooch that had been her mother's. A simple gold chain. Mrs. Holloway picked up the brooch, studied it. Then deliberately, she dropped it on the floor and stepped on it. The delicate pin snapped. "Careless," she said to the empty room. "Just like her." That was enough. Lydia pushed open the panel and stepped out of the storage closet. Mrs. Holloway spun around, her face going white. "Mrs. Ashcroft, don't!" Lydia's voice was ice. "Don't say another word." The housekeeper's shock lasted only a moment. Then her expression shifted, calculating. "I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain the earring you just planted in my husband's nightstand? The letters you were about to leave out for the staff to find?" Lydia stepped closer. "Or maybe you'd like to explain the first earring, the one that started all of this." Mrs. Holloway's face hardened. The pretense of servitude fell away completely, revealing something cold underneath. "You don't belong here. That's not your decision to make. Isn't it? I've run this house for 12 years. I raised that boy after his mother died. This estate, this household, it's mine in every way that matters." The housekeeper's voice was low, venomous. "And then you arrived. Some merchant's daughter with barely a name, thinking you could walk in and take over." I'm his wife. You're a stranger, an intruder. Mrs. Holloway took a step forward. I tried to make you leave quietly, gave you every opportunity to walk away with dignity, but you came back. You couldn't just accept that you weren't wanted. By you, maybe, not by Rowan. Rowan. The housekeeper's laugh was bitter. You think he chose you? His father arranged that marriage on his deathbed. Rowan agreed because he needed heirs, needed a wife to maintain appearances. He doesn't love you. Yeah, the words were designed to wound, and they did. But Lydia kept her expression steady. That's between him and me, not you. Everything in this house is my business. No, it's not. It never was. Lydia held up the cloth bag she'd snatched from the dresser. This is evidence of sabotage, of deliberate manipulation. You destroyed my property, planted false evidence, and tried to ruin my marriage. Those aren't the actions of a loyal servant. Mrs. Holloway's eyes narrowed. You can't prove anything. Can't I? I watched you plant that earring, watched you break my mother's brooch. And I'm not the only witness. She'd gambled that Rowan was somewhere nearby, listening. The gamble paid off. The bedroom door opened. Rowan stepped inside, his face carved from stone. Sir, Mrs. Holloway's voice shifted instantly, back to that professional tone. I can explain. Explain what? Rowan's voice was dangerously quiet. Explain how you've been undermining my wife for months? How you planted evidence to destroy my marriage? How you just tried to do it again? You don't understand. I understand perfectly. He crossed the room, stopped in front of the housekeeper. You saw Lydia as a threat to your control, so you decided to remove her, quietly, carefully, in a way that would make it look like our marriage failed on its own. Mrs. Holloway's mask cracked. She doesn't belong here. This house ran perfectly before she came. The staff knew their place, the routines were established, everything worked. And then she started making changes, questioning decisions, acting like she had the right. She does have the right. She's my wife, the mistress of this house. She's nothing. The words burst out, raw and furious. A nobody with a dead father's debts and no real breeding. You should have married someone worthy of the Ashcroft name, someone who understood how things work. Someone like you? Rowan's voice was cutting. Mrs. Holloway froze. Something flashed across her face. Exposure, shame, rage, all mixed together. You think I didn't notice? Rowan continued, relentless. The way you ran this house like it was yours. The way you inserted yourself into every decision, every aspect of my life. I thought it was loyalty, dedication. I was wrong. I've given everything to this family. You've controlled everything. There's a difference. He stepped back, his face hard. Pack your belongings. You'll leave first thing in the morning. What? Mrs. Holloway's composure shattered completely. You're dismissing me after 12 years? After everything I've done for you? After everything you've done, you're lucky I'm not calling the magistrate. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Rowan's voice could have cut glass. You sabotaged my marriage. You manipulated my household. You just attempted to plant evidence again, knowing exactly what you were doing. I could have you charged. No one would believe it. The staff is loyal to me. Are they? Or are they afraid of you? Lydia spoke up. I saw how they looked at you, Mrs. Holloway. That wasn't respect. It was fear. The housekeeper's eyes swung to her, blazing with hatred. You know nothing about running a household. Nothing about what it takes to keep a place like this functioning. You're a child playing at being a lady. Maybe. But I'm learning, and I'll do it without destroying people in the process. Lydia held her ground. You could have helped me, taught me. Instead, you tried to break me. Because you didn't deserve to be here. That wasn't your call to make. The shout echoed in the room. Mrs. Holloway fell silent, breathing hard. For a moment, she looked less like a housekeeper and more like what she really was, a woman who'd built her entire identity around controlling a house that was never hers, and was now watching it all collapse. I love this place, she said finally, her voice cracking. I gave it everything, and you, both of you, you're throwing me out like I'm nothing. You did this to yourself, Rowan said. There was no satisfaction in his voice, just finality. You'll have a reference letter for future employment. It will mention your efficiency, but not the rest. That's more than generous. Mrs. Holloway stared at him, then at Lydia. The hatred in her eyes was pure and scorching. You'll regret this, she said quietly. Both of you. This house will fall apart without me. You'll see. We'll manage, Lydia said. The housekeeper turned and walked out, her spine rigid. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Silence filled the bedroom. Lydia's legs suddenly felt weak. She sat on the edge of the bed, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her shaky. Rowan moved to the nightstand, opened the drawer, and removed the pearl earring Mrs. Holloway had planted. He held it up to the light, his expression unreadable. She kept a matching set, he said, in case one wasn't enough. She was thorough, obsessive. He dropped the earring on the dresser. I should have seen it sooner. The signs were there. We both missed them. Lydia looked down at her hands. They were trembling. She really believed this house was hers. In a way, it was. I let her have too much control, trusted her too completely. Rowan sat beside Lydia on the bed. I'm sorry for all of it, for not protecting you from her, for not seeing what was happening. I'm sorry, too, for not trusting you when it mattered. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the confrontation still heavy in the air. What happens now, Lydia asked. We rebuild, properly this time. Rowan's hand found hers squeezed gently. No more letting someone else run our household. No more assumptions. We do this together. Lydia nodded. It sounded simple. It wouldn't be. A knock at the door startled them both. Rowan stood. Yes? Sarah's voice came through, frightened. Mr. Ashcroft, sir, you need to come downstairs. Something's happened. They found the servants gathered in the main hall, all looking shaken. The butler stepped forward. Sir, it's Mrs. Holloway. She's locked herself in the study. He hesitated. She's destroying the household records. Rowan's face went white. What? We heard crashing, breaking glass. When we tried to open the door, she screamed at us to leave her alone. Rowan was already moving, Lydia close behind. They reached the study to find the door indeed locked, and the sound of destruction clear from within, papers tearing, furniture overturning. So, Mrs. Holloway! Rowan pounded on the door. Open this door immediately! Go away! Her voice was ragged, wild. If I'm nothing to this house, then the house gets nothing from me. The household records are essential. Burn them all. Let's see how well you manage without them. Rowan stepped back, looked at the butler. Break it down. It took 3 tries, but the door splintered inward. They rushed inside to find chaos. The study was devastated. Books pulled from shelves, papers strewn everywhere. The household ledgers, years of carefully maintained records, lay in shreds. Ink spilled across the desk, and in the center of it all stood Mrs. Holloway, holding a lit lamp over a pile of documents. One more step, she said, her voice eerily calm now. And I dropped this. Yeah. Rowan froze. Don't. Why not? You're throwing away 12 years of my life. Why shouldn't I return the favor? Because this isn't about you, Lydia said, stepping forward carefully. This is about control. You're trying to prove that without you we're helpless, but we're not. You'll be lost, confused. You don't know how anything works. Then we'll learn. We'll make mistakes and fix them. We'll rebuild. Lydia kept her voice steady. But burning those records won't change anything. It'll just prove you were never who you pretended to be. Mrs. Holloway's hand shook. The lamp wavered. I was loyal. I was dedicated. I gave everything. You were controlling. You manipulated people. You chose your power over everyone else's well-being. Lydia took another step. Put down the lamp. No. Yes. Because whatever you think this will accomplish, it won't. You'll still be dismissed. We'll still move forward. The only difference is you'll destroy years of history out of spite. The housekeeper's face crumpled. For a moment she looked lost. Then the hardness returned. You don't deserve this house. Maybe not, but it's mine anyway. Lydia held out her hand. Give me the lamp, Mrs. Holloway. The standoff stretched. Mrs. Holloway stood rigid, the flame dancing in her hand. Lydia waited, barely breathing. Finally, the housekeeper's shoulders sagged. She set the lamp on the desk with a sharp click and walked past them all without a word, heading for the stairs. Rowan exhaled shakily. Get someone to watch her. Make sure she doesn't try anything else. The butler nodded and left. Rowan turned to survey the destroyed study, his expression bleak. Lydia moved to the desk, started gathering the torn papers. Some were salvageable. Most weren't. This is going to take weeks to sort out, Rowan said. Months, probably. Lydia found a ledger that had been ripped in half. But we'll do it. He knelt beside her, helping collect the scattered documents. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same paper, and they both paused. Thank you, Rowan said quietly, for not running when this got ugly. Where would I go? This is my home too. Lydia managed a tired smile. Besides, someone has to make sure you don't let the next housekeeper take over. No more housekeepers for a while. We'll manage with the existing staff and hire carefully. He stood, pulled her to her feet. Come on, we can't fix this tonight. Moss. Might. They left the study, closing the damaged door behind them. The hallway was quiet now. The servants returned to their quarters. But Lydia could feel the house breathing differently, like something had fundamentally shifted. Sarah appeared from the shadows, startling them both. Ma'am, I'm sorry to intrude. It's all right, Sarah. What is it? Oh. The young maid twisted her hands. I just wanted to say, the staff, we're glad you stayed. Mrs. Holloway, she ran things efficiently, but she wasn't kind. You are. Lydia felt something tighten in her throat. Thank you for telling me that. Sarah nodded and disappeared. Lydia and Rowan continued up the stairs in silence. At the landing, Rowan paused. Where are you sleeping tonight? Lydia looked at the hallway leading to the blue room, then at the master bedroom door. I'm tired of being exiled. If you don't mind, I don't mind. They entered the bedroom together. It still felt like a crime scene, but it was theirs. Lydia changed behind the screen while Rowan put out most of the lamps. When she emerged, he was sitting on his side of the bed, staring at nothing. What are you thinking? She asked. That I was a fool. That I let a servant destroy nearly everything that mattered because I was too blind to see what was happening. Lydia sat beside him. We were both blind, but we saw eventually. Almost too late. But not too late. She took his hand. We're still here. We're still married. The house is still standing. Barely. That's enough to build on. Hiss. Rowan turned to look at her, and something in his expression shifted. I meant what I said in the library. I want you. Not an idea of you. Not a perfect version. Just you. Lydia's breath caught. Even with all my flaws, my suspicion and my need for evidence and my terrible trust issues, especially with those, they're what make you real. He reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't want perfect, Lydia. Perfect is boring. I want complicated and challenging and real. She leaned into his touch. This is going to be hard. Rebuilding takes time. I know. We're going to fight, make mistakes, probably hurt each other again. Probably. And the house is going to be chaos for months. Definitely. Rowan smiled, tired but genuine. But we'll figure it out, together. Lydia kissed him. It wasn't dramatic or sweeping. Just a quiet acknowledgement of choice, of commitment, of two people deciding to try despite everything. When they finally settled into sleep, the bedroom felt different. Still complicated, still carrying the weight of what had happened. But theirs. Lydia closed her eyes, Rowan's breathing evening out beside her. Tomorrow, they'd deal with Mrs. Holloway's departure, the destroyed records, the uncertain household. Tonight, they just needed to rest. She was almost asleep when the sound registered. Footsteps. In the hallway. Moving quickly. Lydia sat up. Rowan was already awake, already moving toward the door. He opened it to find the butler, pale-faced. Sir, Mrs. Holloway. She's gone. What do you mean, gone? She's not in her room. We've searched. She's nowhere in the house. And, sir, the butler's voice shook. The silver is missing. And the strongbox from your father's old room. Rowan's face went hard. How long ago? We don't know. We just discovered it. Lydia joined Rowan at the door, her heart pounding. Mrs. Holloway had run, but she'd taken what she could carry, stolen from the house she claimed to love. Final proof of what she really was. Send for the magistrate, Rowan said, and riders to the nearest towns. She can't have gotten far. The butler hurried away. Rowan turned back to Lydia, and she saw the betrayal fresh on his face. 12 years of loyalty, revealed as 12 years of possession and control. We'll find her, Lydia said. But as she spoke, she wondered, would they? And what would they find when they did? A housekeeper facing justice, or a woman so broken by losing control that she'd destroyed herself completely? The night stretched ahead, full of questions with no answers yet. And somewhere in the darkness, Mrs. Holloway was running. The magistrate arrived at dawn, a thin man named Pritchard who'd served the district for 20 years and looked like he'd seen everything twice. He listened to Rowan's account with the weary patience of someone accustomed to household drama, turning criminal. So she planted evidence, destroyed property, and absconded with valuables. Pritchard summarized, making notes in a leather-bound book. What's the approximate value of what's missing? Rowan's jaw tightened. The silver service alone is worth several £100s. The strongbox contained family documents and approximately £200 in banknotes. And you're certain she took these items? They're gone. She's gone. The timing isn't coincidence. Pritchard nodded, still writing. I'll send word to the neighboring districts. If she tries to sell the silver, someone will notice. It's distinctive enough? It has the Ashcroft crest. Good. That helps. The magistrate closed his book. Though I'll be frank with you, Mr. Ashcroft, servants who've been with a family for years often have sympathizers. She may find help we don't anticipate. Lydia spoke up from where she stood by the window. You think someone's hiding her? I think it's possible. 12 years is a long time. She'll have connections. Pritchard stood. I'll do what I can, but don't expect quick resolution. These things take time. Whoa. After he left, Lydia turned to Rowan. He doesn't think we'll find her. He's probably right. Rowan looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all. She knows this area, knows people. If she planned this, she didn't plan it. She snapped. Lydia moved away from the window. The destruction in the study, the theft, that was desperation, not strategy, which means she'll make mistakes. Or disappear completely. Maybe. Lydia sat in the chair across from him. But either way, we can't spend the next weeks consumed by this. The household still needs to function. The staff is terrified. We have work to do. Oh, Rowan rubbed his face. You're right. He stopped. I trusted her for years. Finding out it was all manipulation, it makes me question everything. Don't. Question her, yes. But don't let her poison your judgment of everyone else. Lydia leaned forward. The butler has been nothing but loyal. Sarah tried to warn me in her way. Not everyone in this house was against us. How do we know who to trust? We watch, we listen, and we make decisions together instead of delegating everything to one person. She held his gaze. No more queens of the castle, just us figuring it out. A knock interrupted them. The butler appeared, looking apologetic. Sir, the cook is asking for direction regarding today's meals. Mrs. Holloway usually provided the weekly menu. I'll handle it, Lydia said, standing. Thank you. The butler's surprise was obvious, but quickly masked. Very good, ma'am. After he left, Rowan raised an eyebrow. You're taking over the menus? Someone has to, and apparently I've been shut out of that particular duty for months. Lydia straightened her dress. Time to change that. She found the cook in the kitchens, a stout woman named Mrs. Perry who'd been with the household for 7 years. The woman looked up nervously as Lydia entered. Mrs. Ashcroft, I didn't expect, that is, I wasn't sure what the protocol was now that Mrs. Holloway is gone, Lydia finished. Neither am I entirely, but we'll figure it out together. Tell me what you need. Mrs. Perry relaxed slightly. Well, ma'am, I usually plan 3 days ahead. We need to order from the butcher and the greengrocer, and with the house guests expected next week. House guests? Lydia frowned. What house guests? The Marlowes, ma'am. Mrs. Holloway arranged it weeks ago. They're due to arrive Tuesday. Lydia felt her stomach drop. The Marlowes were prominent in local society, exactly the kind of people who would notice and gossip about household chaos, and they were arriving in 4 days. Did anyone inform Mr. Ashcroft of this arrangement? Mrs. Perry shifted uncomfortably. I assume Mrs. Holloway had, ma'am. Of course she hadn't. One more way to maintain control, to keep information flowing through her exclusively. Lydia took a breath, steadying herself. All right, we'll manage. Let's start with the menus. What were you planning? They spent an hour going through the details. Meals, service times, dietary preferences the Marlowes had mentioned on previous visits. Mrs. Perry knew her work, but she'd been accustomed to taking orders, not collaborating. Lydia made suggestions rather than demands, asking questions, listening. By the time they finished, the cook looked less anxious and more engaged. If I may say so, ma'am, Mrs. Perry ventured, it's nice to be asked what I think. Mrs. Holloway had very specific ideas about everything. I'm sure she did, but this is your kitchen, Mrs. Perry. I trust your expertise. Lydia stood. If you have concerns or suggestions, bring them to me directly. No intermediaries. The cook's smile was genuine. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Lydia left the kitchens feeling slightly less overwhelmed. One small victory. 1,000 more challenges waiting. She found Rowan in the destroyed study, trying to sort through the scattered documents. He'd made some progress. Neat stacks of salvageable papers, a pile of ruined ones set aside. The Marlowes are coming Tuesday, Lydia announced. Rowan looked up, his expression going blank. What? Mrs. Holloway arranged it, apparently forgot to mention it to anyone except the cook. Of course she did. Rowan set down the papers he'd been holding. We can send word, cancel. No, we host them. Lydia moved into the room, careful not to step on the scattered documents. Canceling now will just fuel gossip. They'll hear about Mrs. Holloway's dismissal eventually, but if we're functioning normally when they arrive, it weakens whatever story she might spread. Functioning normally with a devastated study, missing household records, and a staff that just watched their housekeeper steal from us? Yes. Lydia knelt beside him, started organizing papers. We show them that Ashcroft Manor is under new management and running better than ever. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, you're serious? Completely. Mrs. Holloway wanted us to fail without her, wanted to prove we were helpless. The best revenge is succeeding anyway. That's ambitious. That's necessary. Lydia found a torn ledger page, matched it to its other half. Besides, the staff needs to see that we can handle this, that the household doesn't collapse just because one person left. Rowan watched her work, something shifting in his expression. When did you get so strategic? I've always been strategic. You just didn't notice because I was too busy being undermined. She glanced at him. Are you with me on this? He nodded slowly. Yes, but it's going to be chaos. Controlled chaos. The best kind. They worked through the morning, sorting documents. Some were completely unsalvageable, torn beyond recognition or damaged by spilled ink, but others could be pieced together, information recovered. Sarah brought them lunch on a tray, looking surprised to find them both on the floor surrounded by papers. Would you prefer to eat in the dining room, sir? Here's fine, Rowan said. Thank you, Sarah. The girl set down the tray, hesitated. Ma'am, if I may, some of the staff are wondering about their positions. With Mrs. Holloway gone, we're not sure. Your positions are secure, Lydia assured her. No one is being dismissed. We're just changing how things operate. And Mrs. Holloway? Is she coming back? No. Rowan's voice was firm. She won't be returning. Sarah nodded, looking relieved. Some of us are glad, sir. She was efficient, but she wasn't always fair. After she left, Lydia turned to Rowan. That's the second person who's hinted that the staff feared her more than respected her. We should talk to them, all of them, find out what's really been happening in this house. One at a time, Lydia suggested. Individual conversations. People are more honest when they're not worried about being overheard. That afternoon, they began. Rowan spoke with the butler, the head groom, the groundskeeper. Lydia talked with the maids, the cook, the scullery staff. The picture that emerged was troubling. Mrs. Holloway had ruled through fear and favoritism. Staff members who questioned her were given the worst duties. Mistakes were punished disproportionately. She'd controlled access to Rowan, filtering information, making herself indispensable, and she'd been systematically erasing Lydia's authority from the beginning. Every instruction you gave went through her first, the housemaid Emma confessed during her conversation with Lydia. She'd tell us you were still learning, that we should wait for her approval before implementing changes. We thought it was proper protocol. It wasn't, Lydia said. But you weren't to know that. Emma twisted her apron. She made it sound like you were fragile, ma'am, like we needed to protect you from the realities of running a household. But I think she just didn't want you to have any real power. That's exactly what she wanted. Lydia paused. Emma, if I give you an instruction now, will you follow it? Or will you second-guess it because of what Mrs. Holloway taught you? The maid met her eyes. I'll follow it, ma'am. You're the mistress here, not her, us. By evening, Lydia and Rowan had a clearer picture. The household had been a dictatorship disguised as efficient management, and now they had the chance to rebuild it properly. We need to set clear expectations, Rowan said as they reviewed their notes. New protocols. Everyone needs to understand who has authority over what. And we need to mean it, Lydia added. No more delegating everything and hoping it works out. We have to be present. That's going to be exhausting. Probably, but it's necessary. She looked at the list they'd compiled. I think we should have a household meeting. Tomorrow morning, everyone present. Lay out the new structure. Rowan nodded. Agreed, though I'm not sure what to say. The truth. That we made mistakes, that we're changing how things work, and that we need everyone's cooperation. Lydia set down her pen, and that anyone who can't accept the new arrangement is free to seek other employment. You think some will leave? Maybe. Better to know now than have resentment festering. The meeting took place in the servants' hall the next morning. The entire staff assembled, looking nervous. Rowan stood at the front, Lydia beside him. Thank you all for coming, Rowan began. I know the past few days have been unsettling. Mrs. Holloway's departure was sudden, and I owe you an explanation. He laid out the facts plainly. The manipulation, the sabotage, the theft. The staff listened in silence, some looking shocked, others merely nodding as though this confirmed suspicions. Going forward, Rowan continued, things will operate differently. Mrs. Ashcroft and I will be managing the household jointly. Any questions or concerns should come directly to us. No more information flowing through a single person. Right? Yeah, it's true. Lydia stepped forward. I know this is an adjustment. You're accustomed to a certain way of doing things, but I need you to understand I'm not trying to disrupt your work. I'm trying to create a household where everyone has clear responsibilities and fair treatment. What about discipline, ma'am? The butler asked. If there are issues, then we address them directly and proportionally. No more arbitrary punishments. Lydia glanced around the room. I also want to hear from you. If you see problems, inefficiencies, things that could be improved, tell me. You know this house better than I do. I'd be a fool not to listen. The cook raised her hand tentatively. And the menus, ma'am? The household schedule? We'll collaborate on those. You have expertise I don't. I'll provide direction, but I trust your judgment. Boss. Slowly, the tension in the room began to ease. Questions came about duties, schedules, protocols. Rowan and Lydia answered as best they could, admitting when they didn't know something. We're going to make mistakes, Rowan said finally. This is new for all of us, but we'll figure it out together. Anyone who's not comfortable with this new arrangement, I'll provide references and a month's wages. No hard feelings. No one moved to leave. The butler cleared his throat. Sir, ma'am, I think I speak for most of us when I say we're willing to try. Mrs. Holloway was efficient, but she wasn't always easy to work for. This household has felt tense. Perhaps a fresh start is what's needed. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Lydia felt something unknot in her chest. This could work. It wouldn't be smooth, but it could work. The next 3 days were controlled chaos. Lydia threw herself into preparation for the Marlowes' visit, working alongside the staff to ensure everything was perfect. She reviewed menus with Mrs. Perry, helped the maids prepare the guest rooms, even worked with the gardener to select flowers for arrangements. Rowan focused on salvaging the study and managing the estate business that had been neglected during the crisis. He worked late into the nights, piecing together torn documents, reconstructing what Mrs. Holloway had destroyed. They fell into bed exhausted each night, barely speaking before sleep claimed them. But slowly, the house began to feel different, lighter. The staff moved with less fear and more purpose. Conversations happened openly instead of in whispers. Changes were implemented quickly instead of being filtered through layers of approval. And Lydia began to understand what it meant to actually run a household instead of just occupy it. Tuesday morning arrived too quickly. Lydia woke to rain pattering against the windows and a knot of anxiety in her stomach. The Marlowes would arrive by afternoon. Everything had to be perfect. She dressed carefully in a deep burgundy dress, pinned her hair in a style that suggested confidence without ostentation. When she came downstairs, she found Rowan in the hall, also dressed formally. "Ready?" he asked. "Not even slightly. You?" Terrified. He offered his arm. "Let's do this anyway." They did a final inspection together. The guest rooms were immaculate. The dining room gleamed. Fresh flowers filled the vases. The staff moved efficiently through their duties. It looked like a household that had been running smoothly for years. The deception was perfect. The Marlowes arrived precisely at 3. Lord Marlowe was a portly man with shrewd eyes. His wife, Catherine, was elegant and sharp-tongued, the kind of woman who noticed everything and forgot nothing. Lydia greeted them in the drawing room, her smile warm and practiced. "Catherine, how lovely to see you. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult in this weather." "Dreadful roads, but we managed." Catherine's gaze swept the room, assessing. "The house looks well. I'd heard, well, there were rumors of some household difficulties." So the gossip had already started. Lydia kept her expression pleasant. "Staff transitions. Nothing dramatic. We're running quite smoothly now. I'm sure. Where's Mrs. Holloway? I must thank her for the excellent arrangements last time we visited." "Mrs. Holloway is no longer with us," Rowan said, entering with Lord Marlowe. "We've restructured the household management." Catherine's eyebrows rose. "Oh? After so many years? How unexpected." "These things happen," Lydia said lightly. "But I think you'll find everything is well in hand. Sarah will show you to your rooms. Dinner is at 7. After the guests departed upstairs, Catherine's maid lingering to collect their things, Lydia exhaled slowly. "She knows something," she murmured to Rowan. "Of course she does. She schwabachis. Catherine Marlowe knows everything that happens within 50 miles. Rowan's voice was dry. "We just have to be better at deflecting than she is at prying." Dinner that evening was an exercise in controlled performance. The food was excellent. Mrs. Perry had outdone herself. The service was flawless. The conversation was pleasant and carefully steered away from anything controversial. But Catherine was persistent. "I'm surprised you let Mrs. Holloway go," she remarked over the fish course. "She seemed so devoted to the family." "Devotion can become possessiveness," Lydia said. "We felt it was time for a change." Still, 12 years. One wonders what prompted such a sudden shift. Rowan set down his wine glass with deliberate care. "Catherine, if you have a question, ask it directly. We're friends. No need for subtlety." Lord Marlowe chuckled. "You'll have to forgive my wife. Subtlety is her favorite sport." Catherine smiled, unbothered. "Very well. Did Mrs. Holloway do something improper?" "She overstepped her role," Lydia said, "repeatedly, despite correction. So we parted ways." "Oh, I see. And the rumors about theft?" So that had gotten out too. Lydia kept her expression neutral. "The magistrate is investigating. We prefer not to discuss it until the matter is resolved." "Of course, I understand completely." But Catherine's eyes gleamed with curiosity. It must be difficult managing without her. She knew this house so well. We're managing quite adequately, Rowan said. Lydia has taken over many of the duties. The household is running more efficiently than ever, actually. Catherine turned her attention to Lydia. Is that so? You must share your secret. I know so many young wives who struggle with household management. It was a test. Lydia recognized it instantly. Catherine wanted to see if she'd fumble, prove that the household was actually in chaos. There's no secret, Lydia said. Just communication. I work with the staff rather than dictating to them. They know their duties better than I do. I'd be foolish not to listen. How progressive. Catherine's tone was ambiguous, though some might say staff require firm direction. Firm, yes. Tyrannical, no. Lydia met the older woman's eyes. There's a difference between leadership and control. A flicker of something, respect maybe, crossed Catherine's face. Indeed there is. Au passage. The conversation moved to safer topics. But Lydia felt she'd passed some invisible examination. After dinner, the ladies retired to the drawing room while the men took port in the dining room. Catherine settled into a chair by the fire, studying Lydia with open curiosity. You've changed since we last met, she observed. Have I? More confident, more present. Catherine sipped her sherry. When you first married Rowan, you seemed rather overwhelmed by it all. Understandable, given the circumstances. Lydia decided to be honest. I was overwhelmed. This house, the staff, the expectations. It was all foreign to me, and I had help that turned out to be hindrance. Mrs. Holloway. Yes, she was possessive of Rowan, you know, even when his father was alive. After his mother died, she rather inserted herself into a maternal role, or thought she did. Catherine set down her glass. I wondered how long it would take for that to become problematic. Lydia stared at her. You knew what? I suspected, but it wasn't my place to say anything. Besides, you needed to find your own footing here. Outside interference rarely helps. Catherine leaned back. I'm glad you managed it. This house needed a real mistress, not a servant playing the role. The blunt assessment was oddly comforting. Thank you for saying so. I'm not being kind, dear. I'm being accurate. Catherine's smile was sharp. Now tell me honestly, how bad is the chaos? Because I know a household doesn't transition seamlessly no matter how well you're managing. Lydia laughed. It's controlled panic. We're surviving day by day and hoping nothing major breaks. That's what running a house always is. Anyone who tells you different is lying. Catherine's expression softened slightly. You're doing well, Lydia. Better than most would in your position. Hold your ground and trust yourself. The rest will follow. When the men rejoined them, Rowan caught Lydia's eye across the room. She gave a small nod. They were managing. Barely, but managing. The Marlowes stayed 3 days. Each day brought new small crises. A missing serving spoon, confusion about breakfast times, Lord Marlow's dietary requirements that hadn't been properly communicated. But each crisis was handled smoothly enough that the guests remained comfortable. On the morning of their departure, Catherine pulled Lydia aside. Whatever happened with Mrs. Holloway, handle it quietly, she advised. The gossip will fade if you don't feed it. Keep running your household well, and people will forget there was ever any trouble. And if they don't forget, then they'll at least respect your competence. Catherine squeezed her hand. You're stronger than you think. My dear, don't let anyone convince you otherwise. After the Marlowes left, Lydia found Rowan in the study. He'd made significant progress. The room was still chaotic, but organized chaos now. We survived, she said. We did. Rowan looked up from the ledger he'd been reconstructing. Catherine cornered me this morning, said she was impressed with how we'd handled the transition. She told me to hold my ground and trust myself. Good advice. He set down his pen. Lydia, I've been thinking about how to prevent this from happening again. We can't prevent everything. I know, but we can be smarter. He stood, moved around the desk. I want to change how we hire staff. More careful vetting, trial periods. And I want to make sure everyone understands that their loyalty is to this household, not to any individual servant. That's reasonable. And I want you to have final say on household staff. Not me. You. Lydia blinked. What? You're the one working with them daily. You should choose who stays and who goes. Rowan's expression was serious. I trusted Mrs. Holloway because my father did. I never questioned it. That was a mistake. This is your household to run. I'll support your decisions. The gesture felt enormous. Lydia swallowed past the tightness in her throat. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just make good choices. He almost smiled. Better choices than I did, anyway. A knock at the door interrupted them. The butler entered, looking apologetic. Sir, there's a messenger from the magistrate. He says it's urgent. Pritchard's message was brief. Mrs. Holloway had been found. She'd made it as far as the next county before being recognized trying to sell the silver in a market town. The magistrate there had detained her. She was being held pending Rowan's decision on whether to press charges. Lydia and Rowan stood in the study, the message between them. If we prosecute, it becomes public, Rowan said. A trial, testimony, everything exposed. And if we don't? She goes free. With a warning, maybe, but free. Lydia thought about Mrs. Holloway's face in this bedroom, twisted with hatred, the destroyed study, the months of undermining, the pearl earrings carefully saved to destroy a marriage. She won't stop, Lydia said quietly. If we let her go, she'll just find another household, another family to manipulate. I know, but a trial will be ugly for all of us. Rowan was silent for a long moment. Then, what if there's a third option? 2 days later, Rowan returned from the neighboring county. Lydia met him in the hall. Well, I dropped the charges. Before Lydia could protest, he continued, but I made her sign a document confessing to everything. The sabotage, the theft, all of it. If she ever seeks employment with another family, if she ever speaks publicly about us, if she so much as writes a letter that damages our reputation, I release the document. Blackmail. Ishpors ikis. Insurance. Rowan's jaw was set. She wanted control. Now she has none. She can disappear and start over somewhere far from here, or she can face prosecution. Her choice. What did she choose? Disappearance. She's already gone. Headed north, I think. He looked tired. The silver and the money have been recovered. The magistrate will ensure she leaves the county. Lydia processed this. It wasn't justice, exactly, but it was protection. And maybe that was better. No trial, she said. No public scandal. No ammunition for her to use against us. Rowan moved toward the study. It's over, Lydia. Really over. That night, Lydia stood in the bedroom that had been the center of so much conflict. The pearl earrings, both of them now, sat in a small box on her dresser. Evidence of manipulation, yes, but also evidence that they'd survived it. She picked up one earring, studied it in the lamplight. Then deliberately, she walked to the window and threw it as far as she could into the darkness. The second followed. Rowan appeared in this doorway. What was that? Evidence, Lydia said. I don't need it anymore. He understood. Crossed the room, wrapped his arms around her from behind. They stood together, looking out at the dark grounds. The staff has been asking about hiring a new housekeeper, he said. What did you tell them? That we'd discuss it together. He rested his chin on her shoulder. What do you think? Lydia considered. A new housekeeper would make things easier, but it would also create the same power structure that had failed before. Not yet, she decided. Let's see how we manage on our own for a while. If we need someone eventually, we'll hire carefully. But I don't want to rush into replacing one problem with a potential new one. That's going to mean more work for you. I'm aware. She turned in his arms. But I'd rather be exhausted and in control than comfortable and undermined. Rowan kissed her forehead. Fair enough. They'd survived. The household was functioning. The enemy was gone, scattered to winds that would carry her far from Ashcroft Manor. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about their situation was perfect, but it was theirs, and that, Lydia thought, was victory enough. The magistrate arrived at dawn, a gray-haired man named Pemberton, who'd known the Ashcroft family for decades. He listened to Rowan's account with a deepening frown, examined the destroyed study, and questioned the staff one by one. By mid-morning, he'd sent riders to every neighboring town and posted notices at the coaching inns. Mrs. Holloway's description circulated with the missing silver. distinctive pieces that would be hard to sell without raising questions. "She'll surface," Pemberton said, standing in the entrance hall. "They always do. Anger makes people reckless." Lydia wasn't so sure. Mrs. Holloway had been methodical in her sabotage, patient in her manipulation. That kind of control didn't evaporate overnight, but she'd also been desperate, and desperation made even careful people make mistakes. "How long?" Rowan asked. "Days. Maybe a week." Pemberton settled his hat. "In the meantime, secure what's left, and keep detailed records of everything missing. You'll need them for the trial." After he left, the house felt hollow. The staff moved quietly, uncertain without Mrs. Holloway's iron command. Meals appeared late. Rooms went uncleaned. The machine that had run so smoothly for years was suddenly grinding to a halt. Lydia found Rowan in the study, staring at the chaos of torn papers. "We need to address the staff," she said. "I know. Now, Rowan, before they decide the house is falling apart and start looking for new positions." He rubbed his face tiredly. "What do I tell them?" "The truth, or as much of it as they need to hear." Lydia moved to the desk, started sorting papers into piles. Salvageable, destroyed, uncertain. That Mrs. Holloway overstepped. That we're rebuilding. That their positions are secure if they're willing to be patient. And if they're not, then we find out who's actually loyal and who is just afraid to leave. She glanced up at him. "Either way, we need to know." Rowan called the household together in the main hall an hour later. The entire staff assembled, maids, footmen, cook, stable hands, everyone. They looked worried, whispering among themselves. Rowan stood at the base of the staircase, Lydia beside him. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the questions they weren't asking. "You all know Mrs. Holloway has left," Rowan began. His voice was steady, carrying, "What you may not know is that she was dismissed for serious misconduct. She attempted to sabotage my marriage and stole from this household. The magistrate is currently searching for her." Murmurs rippled through the assembled staff. Some looked shocked. Others, Lydia noticed, looked relieved. "I take responsibility for not seeing what was happening sooner," Rowan continued. "I trusted her completely, and that trust was misplaced. But going forward, things will be different." He paused, looked at Lydia. She stepped forward. "This household is going to change," she said. "Not overnight, and not without difficulty. But it needs to change. Mrs. Holloway ran things her way for a long time. Some of you appreciated that. Some of you didn't." She met their eyes, one by one. "I'm not going to pretend I know everything about running an estate. I don't. I'm learning. But I promise you this, I will listen. I will be fair. And I will not tolerate cruelty or manipulation from anyone, including myself." "Whoa, of course, sorry." Sarah, standing near the back, smiled slightly. "The next few weeks will be hard," Lydia continued. "We have to rebuild systems, establish new routines, figure out how to function without someone controlling every detail. I need you to be patient, and I need you to speak up if something isn't working. Can you do that?" Slowly, heads began to nodding. Not everyone looked convinced, but it was a start. "Any questions?" Rowan asked. The cook raised her hand tentatively. "Will you be hiring a new housekeeper, sir?" "Eventually, but I'll be making that decision carefully, with my wife's input. In the meantime, we'll manage together." The butler cleared his throat. "And the household budget, sir?" Mrs. Holloway controlled the accounts. "I'll be reviewing everything personally. If you need funds for supplies or repairs, come to me directly. No more intermediaries." More nods. The tension in the hall eased slightly. After the staff dispersed, Lydia leaned against the banister, exhausted. "That went better than I expected." "You were good," Rowan said. "They needed to hear from you. I probably should have done it months ago. We both should have done a lot of things differently." He offered her his arm. "Come on, we have a study to excavate." They spent the afternoon sorting through the destruction. Some records were completely lost. Household accounts from 5 years ago, correspondence, inventory lists. But others had survived, and Lydia created a system for organizing what remained. "We'll have to reconstruct the missing pieces," she said, making notes. "Interview the staff about what they remember. Cross-reference with bank statements. That'll take months." "Better than nothing," Lydia set down her pen. and it'll give me something to do besides worry about Mrs. Holloway. Rowan looked up from the papers he was sorting. You think she's still dangerous? I think she's desperate. That makes anyone dangerous. Lydia moved to the window, looked out at the grounds. She spent 12 years building her kingdom here. We destroyed it in one night. People don't just walk away from that. What do you think she'll do? I don't know, but I don't think we've seen the last of her. The words proved prophetic. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Not delivered by post, left on the doorstep in the middle of the night, found by the butler at dawn. Rowan opened it in the study, Lydia reading over his shoulder. You think you've won. You think dismissing me, ruining my reputation, stealing my position makes you victorious. But you've forgotten something important. I know this house better than either of you ever will. I know its secrets, its weaknesses. I know where the money is hidden, which servants can be bought, which neighbors will listen to scandal. You wanted to destroy me. Instead, you've made an enemy, and I promise you, before this is over, you'll understand exactly what you've lost. The house will fall. Your marriage will fracture. And I will watch from the shadows as everything you tried to build crumbles into dust. You should have let me stay. The letter wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Lydia's hands were shaking when she finished reading. She's threatening us. She's bluffing. Rowan's voice was hard, but Lydia heard the uncertainty underneath. What can she actually do? She has no position, no resources. She has knowledge and connections. Lydia paced the room. She said she knows where money is hidden. What does that mean? Rowan's face went pale. My father's emergency fund. He kept cash hidden in the house, somewhere only he and Mrs. Holloway knew about. I never found it after he died. Assumed it had been moved or spent. How much? Enough to live on for years. If she has access to that, then she's not desperate anymore. She's funded. Lydia's mind raced, and she mentioned servants who can be bought. She could still have people in this house feeding her information. They looked at each other, the same thought occurring to both simultaneously. We need to find out who, Rowan said, and we need to find that money before she does. The search consumed the next 2 days. Rowan went through his father's papers, looking for clues. Lydia questioned the older servants, carefully, indirectly, trying to determine who might have known about the hidden fund. The butler proved surprisingly helpful. Mr. Ashcroft Sr. was paranoid about banks, he confided. After the financial panic 20 years ago, he converted assets to cash and gold, hid them somewhere on the property, but he never told anyone the location except Mrs. Holloway, Lydia finished. I assumed she'd shown you, sir, after you inherited. She never mentioned it. Rowan's jaw was tight, which means she was keeping it for herself, insurance probably, in case she ever needed to disappear. That night, Lydia lay awake thinking, where would you hide significant wealth in a house this size? Somewhere accessible, but not obvious. Somewhere you could check regularly without raising suspicion. The answer came to her at 3 a.m. She shook Rowan awake. The housekeeper's quarters. What? That's where it is. Think about it. Mrs. Holloway had complete privacy there. No one would question her coming and going, and she'd want the money close, where she could monitor it. Rowan sat up, suddenly alert. Her rooms haven't been touched since she left. Exactly. Oh, they dressed quickly, took a lamp, and made their way to the servants' wing. Mrs. Holloway's rooms were at the end, larger than the others, befitting her position. The door was locked, but Rowan had the master key. Inside, everything was neat, obsessively so. The bed made with hospital corners, books arranged by height, not a speck of dust anywhere. Where do we start? Rowan asked. Lydia moved through the room methodically, checking for loose floorboards, hollow walls, hidden compartments. Rowan searched the furniture, the wardrobe, the small writing desk. Nothing. Lydia sat on the bed, frustrated. They were missing something. Mrs. Holloway was too smart to leave the money somewhere obvious, but she'd also need regular access. Where would she? Her gaze fell on the fireplace. Unused, perfectly clean. Too clean. She knelt in front of it, examining the bricks. Most were mortared solidly, but one, near the back of the firebox, shifted slightly when she pressed it. Rowan? He joined her, and together they pried the loose brick free. Behind it was a cavity in the wall, and inside that cavity was a metal box. Rowan pulled it out with shaking hands. It wasn't locked, Mrs. Holloway had been confident no one would find it. Inside were stacks of bills, gold coins, and a ledger. Lydia opened the ledger. Page after page of entries in Mrs. Holloway's precise handwriting. Amounts taken from the household accounts over the years. Small amounts, carefully dispersed so they'd never be noticed. Theft, documented in meticulous detail. "This is years of embezzlement," Rowan said, his voice hollow. "She was stealing from my father. From me. The entire time." Lydia counted quickly. "There's at least £5,000 here. Maybe more." "That's not the emergency fund. That's her retirement plan." Rowan's hands clenched. She was going to bleed this estate dry and disappear with a fortune. Lydia closed the ledger. "We need to get this to Pemberton. This is proof of theft on a massive scale. It's also proof that I was blind for years." Rowan's voice was bitter. "That I trusted someone who was robbing me the entire time." "You trusted someone who was very good at lying. That's not the same as being blind." Lydia touched his arm. "We found it, Rowan. That's what matters." They took the box and the ledger back to the study, locked them in the safe. At dawn, they sent word to the magistrate. Pemberton arrived that afternoon, read through the ledger with increasing alarm. "This changes everything," he said. "This isn't just theft. It's systematic embezzlement. She could face transportation, possibly even—" He stopped, shook his head. "The courts will not be lenient." "Have you found her yet?" Lydia asked. "No, but this will help. I'll circulate new notices with updated charges. Someone will recognize her." After Pemberton left, Lydia found herself restless. Mrs. Holloway was still out there, still threatening. The letter had promised destruction, and Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that the other shoe hadn't dropped yet. She was right. The scandal broke 2 days later. Lydia first heard about it from Sarah, who came to her room pale and shaking. "Ma'am, you need to see this." She handed Lydia a scandal sheet, the kind of cheap publication that society pretended not to read, but everyone did. The headline made Lydia's blood run cold. "Ashcroft marriage in shambles. Wife flees estate after husband's infidelity exposed." The article was poison. It claimed Lydia had left the manor after discovering Rowan's affair with a woman of lower station, that she'd returned only to secure a financial settlement. Returned. That the household was in chaos, the staff demoralized, the estate falling into ruin. Every word was designed to destroy their reputation. And woven throughout were details only someone intimately familiar with the household would know. Private conversations, specific incidents, the kind of insider knowledge that made the lies sound plausible. "Mrs. Holloway," Lydia breathed. "It gets worse, ma'am." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "There are rumors all over town. People saying Mr. Ashcroft is cruel, that you're fragile and unstable, that the marriage was a mistake from the start." Lydia felt rage building in her chest. This was Mrs. Holloway's revenge, not physical, not direct, but calculated to destroy them socially. In their world, reputation was everything. Scandal could ruin lives. She found Rowan in the study, holding his own copy of the scandal sheet. His face was carved from ice. "This is her," he said. "Every word. She's trying to destroy us from outside the house, since she couldn't do it from within." "It's working. I've already had 3 calls canceled, neighbors making excuses." He crumpled the paper. "By the end of the week, we'll be pariahs." But Lydia took the ruined scandal sheet from his hands. "Then we don't wait for the end of the week." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we fight back. Not with more gossip, with the truth." She moved to the desk, found paper and pen. "We're going to host a dinner party." Rowan stared at her. "You want to invite people here? Now?" "I want to invite everyone. The neighbors, the local gentry, anyone who's read that article and believes it." She started making a list. "We'll serve them dinner, show them the household functioning, let them see us together, and then we'll tell them exactly what happened. They won't believe us. Some will, some won't, but we're not going to hide like we're ashamed." Lydia's pen scratched across the paper. "Mrs. Holloway wants us to retreat, to crumble. We're going to do the opposite." "Lydia, this could backfire spectacularly. It could. But doing nothing definitely won't work. She looked up at him. We need to take control of the narrative. Show people who we actually are, instead of letting her define us. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, we fight back. The invitations went out the next day. Lydia was brutally honest in them, acknowledging the scandal, requesting the opportunity to address it directly, promising an explanation. Half the recipients declined immediately. But the other half, whether from curiosity, loyalty, or a desire for first-hand gossip, accepted. The dinner was set for Saturday, 3 days away. That gave them time to prepare the house, coordinate the staff, and decide exactly what they would say. Lydia threw herself into the preparations. She worked with the cook on the menu, reviewed the table settings, ensured every room that guests might see was immaculate. The staff responded to her energy, working harder than they had since Mrs. Holloway's departure. Sarah proved invaluable. The younger staff is with you, ma'am, she confided while helping arrange flowers. We never liked how Mrs. Holloway ran things. Too rigid, too harsh. And the older staff, mixed. Some are loyal to her memory, but others are starting to see what she was really doing. On Saturday, Lydia dressed with care. Not her finest gown. That would look like she was trying too hard, but something elegant and understated. She wanted to look like a woman in control, not a fragile victim. Rowan met her at the top of the stairs. Ready? No, but we're doing this anyway. The guests arrived promptly at 7. 20 people, a smaller gathering than the manor usually hosted, but significant nonetheless. Lydia greeted each one, noting their expressions. Curiosity, skepticism, a few sympathetic glances. Dinner was served flawlessly. The cook had outdone herself, and the footman moved with precision. Whatever chaos the household had experienced, it wasn't visible tonight. Conversation flowed carefully, everyone avoiding the obvious topic. They discussed weather, local news, the upcoming harvest, surface topics that masked the real question everyone wanted to ask. Finally, over dessert, Rowan set down his fork. I know why you're all here, he said. The table fell silent. You've read the articles, heard the rumors, and you're wondering what's true, Arfi. The guests shifted uncomfortably. One of the older women, Lady Pemberton, the magistrate's wife, spoke up. We're concerned, Rowan. The things being said are lies, Lydia cut in. Not all of them. Some are based on truth, but twisted beyond recognition. She told them the story. Not everything. Some details were too private, too painful. But she explained the sabotage, the planted evidence, the systematic undermining. She showed them the ledger of embezzlement, let them see the documented theft. Mrs. Holloway controlled this household for 12 years, Rowan said. We trusted her completely. That trust was betrayed in the worst possible way. But the scandal sheet mentioned infidelity, someone said. An affair, There was no affair. Lydia's voice was firm. There was an earring planted deliberately to make me believe there was. I fell for it. I left. And when I realized I'd been manipulated, I came back. Why would she do this? Lady Pemberton asked. Control, Rowan said simply. She saw Lydia as a threat to her authority, so she tried to remove that threat. And when we caught her, which Lydia added, she tried to destroy us another way, with lies and scandal. The table was quiet. Lydia could see them processing, weighing the story against what they'd read. Finally, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Hartford spoke. I've known the Ashcroft family for 40 years. Known Mrs. Holloway almost as long. And I've always thought there was something off about how she ran things. Too much control. Too little transparency. Others began nodding, sharing their own observations, small moments that had seemed odd at the time but were dismissed. She wouldn't let me speak to the cook directly about the garden produce, one woman said. Insisted all requests go through her. My wife tried to call on Lydia 3 times, another man added. Each time Mrs. Holloway said she was indisposed. We thought it was odd. The stories accumulated, each one adding weight to Rowan and Lydia's account. The guests began to see the pattern they'd missed. Lady Pemberton reached across the table, squeezed Lydia's hand. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. You had no reason to look, Lydia said. Neither did we. for a long time. After dinner, the guests lingered. The skepticism had shifted to something else. Not quite belief, but willingness to believe. It was a start. As they were leaving, Mr. Hartford pulled Rowan aside. This won't stop the scandal entirely. Mrs. Holloway has clearly been spreading her version widely. But it'll help. People will know there are two sides. That's all we can ask for. After the last guest departed, Lydia and Rowan stood in the empty dining room, exhausted but relieved. "We did it," Lydia said. "You did it. I was ready to hide." Rowan pulled her close. "You're braver than I am. I'm stubborn. There's a difference." He laughed, and the sound felt like release. They'd survived. The scandal would continue to echo for weeks, maybe months, but they'd faced it head on. And that mattered. The magistrate caught Mrs. Holloway a week later in a coastal town, trying to book passage to France. The stolen silver was still in her possession, along with most of the embezzled money. The evidence was overwhelming. The trial was brief. Mrs. Holloway stood before the judge with the same rigid composure she'd always shown, even as the charges were read. Theft, embezzlement, sabotage. The prosecutor presented the ledger, the witnesses, the documentation of years of systematic crime. Mrs. Holloway's defense was simple. She'd earned that money through her service, deserved it for the years she'd sacrificed. The Ashcrofts owed her more than they could ever repay. The judge was unmoved. "You betrayed the trust of the family you served. You stole, you manipulated, and you attempted to destroy a marriage out of spite. The law is clear on such matters." The sentence was 7 years' transportation to the colonies. Mrs. Holloway's face barely changed as she heard it, but Lydia saw her hands clench white on the rail. As she was led away, Mrs. Holloway looked back once. Her eyes found Lydia's across the courtroom. "You still don't deserve it," she said clearly. "Either of you." Then she was gone. Lydia stood outside the courthouse afterward, breathing in the cool air. It was over. Really, truly over. Rowan joined her, took her hand. "How do you feel?" "Strange, like I should feel victorious, but I just feel tired." She spent 12 years building her control. We destroyed it in a matter of weeks. I'd say that's worth feeling tired about. They returned to Ashcroft Manor to find the staff assembled in the entrance hall. Not because they'd been ordered to, but because they'd chosen to be there. Sarah stepped forward. "We heard the verdict, ma'am. We wanted to say, we're glad you stayed. Both of you." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." "The house is better now," the cook added. "Different, but better." It was different. The rigid efficiency Mrs. Holloway had maintained was gone, replaced by something looser but more honest. Meals still appeared, rooms still got cleaned, but there was laughter now in the servants' quarters. Questions instead of blind obedience. Over the next months, Lydia and Rowan rebuilt. They hired a new housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Davies who ran things with gentle competence instead of iron control. They reconstructed the damaged records, established new systems, created routines that actually worked, and they rebuilt their marriage. Not perfectly. There were still arguments, still moments of doubt. Lydia still defaulted to evidence over trust sometimes. Rowan still assumed silence meant contentment when it often meant worry, but they talked about it now. Worked through it, instead of letting it fester. 6 months after Mrs. Holloway's trial, Lydia stood in the study, restored now, reorganized, the destroyed records replaced with new ones. She was reviewing the household accounts when Rowan entered. "Still working?" he asked. "Almost done." She set down her pen. "I've been thinking." "About?" "That earring, the one that started everything." Lydia pulled it from the desk drawer where she'd kept it. "I should throw it away, burn it, something." Rowan took it from her, studied it in the lamplight. "Or we could keep it." "Why?" "As a reminder of what we survived, what we learned." He handed it back. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us teach us the most important lessons." Lydia looked at the pearl earring, this small object that had nearly destroyed everything. "What did we learn?" "That evidence isn't the same as truth, that control isn't the same as loyalty, that trust has to be built, not assumed." Rowan moved closer. "And that we're stronger together than we ever were separate." Lydia closed her hand around the earring. Maybe he was right. Maybe keeping it made sense. She placed it in a small box on the shelf, visible but not prominent, a reminder of the war they'd fought in their own home and won. "Come on," Rowan said, offering his hand. "Dinner's ready." They walked through the house together, past rooms that had been battlegrounds and were now just rooms. The ghosts of Mrs. Holloway's control were fading, replaced by something new, something theirs. At dinner, Sarah served them with a smile. The food was excellent. The conversation flowed easily, and when Lydia looked across the table at her husband, she saw not the stranger she'd married 6 months ago, but a partner she'd chosen to keep, later, in their bedroom, no longer a crime scene, just a room they shared. Lydia stood by the window, looking out at the grounds. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found that earring?" she asked. "If Mrs. Holloway had just stayed quiet, maintained control indefinitely?" Rowan came to stand beside her. "Sometimes, but I think we would have figured it out eventually. Maybe not as dramatically, but we would have seen the cracks. You have more faith in us than I do." "One of us has to." He put his arm around her shoulders. "Besides, you're the one who came back, who fought, who refused to let her win. We fought, both of us." "Fair enough." He kissed her temple. "We fought, we won, and now we get to figure out what comes next." What came next was life. Messy, complicated, imperfect life. There were still challenges, estates didn't run themselves, society didn't forget scandals quickly, and marriage required constant work. But they faced it together, learning as they went. The pearl earring stayed on its shelf, a tiny monument to the battle they'd won. Sometimes Lydia looked at it and remembered the fear, the doubt, the moment she'd chosen evidence over trust. But mostly, she remembered what came after. The choice to fight, the decision to stay, the slow, difficult work of building something real from the wreckage of something false. Years later, when people asked about the early days of their marriage, Lydia would smile and say it had been complicated. She never mentioned Mrs. Holloway by name. The woman had been transported, vanished from their lives as thoroughly as if she had never existed. But the lessons remained. Trust wasn't blind. It was earned through action and proven through crisis. Control wasn't strength. It was often fear wearing a mask. And evidence, cold and concrete as it seemed, only told part of any story. The rest had to be lived. Rowan and Lydia Ashcroft lived it. Not perfectly, never perfectly. But honestly, which turned out to matter more. And in the end, that was enough. The house stood solid through seasons and storms, its walls holding secrets and stories. The bedroom where everything had begun became just a bedroom again, the site of quiet conversations and shared sleep. The study where Mrs. Holloway had tried to burn the past became a place where they built the future. And the pearl earring sat on its shelf, gathering dust. A reminder not of betrayal, but of survival. Not of the enemy who'd tried to divide them, but of the choice they'd made to stand together. The war was over. They'd won. And in the morning, there would be breakfast, and household matters to attend to, and a life to continue building. Together.